We've got some breaking news out of the world of golf where a judge has ruled against the LIV Tour in their antitrust lawsuit against the PGA Tour. As a result, players on the LIV Tour will not be allowed to play in the FedExCup Playoffs. That includes Taylor Gooch, Hudson Swafford, and Matt Jones. Judge Beth Labson-Freeman ruled that the LIV Tour was not able to establish irreparable harm in their lawsuit. All right, for more on the matter, we bring in two of our golfing minds, Kyle Porter and Doug Bell, joining us now to unpack a whole bunch of legalese. A lot of non-golf names talking golf today in a federal court. Kyle Porter, talk to me about what this means, unpack the information, and how it projects forward into the future of golf.
I'm a geopolitical expert now. I'm a courtroom expert now. This is not what we signed up for to cover golf, but it was an extraordinarily interesting thing to watch. You know, I watched all 2+ hours of it. The judge ruled against the temporary restraining order that these three golfers, Taylor Gooch, Matt Jones, and Hudson Swafford, were seeking to be able to play in this week's FedExCup Playoffs. Now, what that means for the long term, I think nobody really knows. This is very much a temporary sort of short-term thing, but I think there was a little bit of foreshadowing in the judge's ruling, and I thought her language was really, really interesting. She sort of cited the LIV golfers' contracts and the fact that there were not irreparable damages or irreparable harm done to these players because they signed contracts, Joe, that would have taken into account the fact that they were going to lose out on future PGA Tour earnings, including the FedEx Cup. And so I think that's super interesting, and it makes a lot of sense to me. I think I don't know all the inner workings. I didn't understand half the words that were being said in this sort of courtroom drama, but I think that singular fact is sort of what most of this hinged on. There were other things that came into play. But the fact that these players signed LIV golf contracts and did so knowing that they were not going to be able to play on the PGA Tour, they would have factored in any future earnings that they would have had on the PGA Tour into those contracts and could have negotiated knowing those things. And I think that fact is sort of why this ruling was made, at least in the short term, to not allow these players to play in this year's FedEx Cup Playoffs.
Short-term ruling that could forebode other things coming down the pipe at these players who have decided to jettison to the LIV Tour. Doug, what was your biggest takeaway from the information you heard today?
Well, number one, it had political ramifications, and I thought going in, perhaps the politics would lean more to the LIV group. But as I listened like Kyle did, the judge took into account everything, the PGA Tour contracts, the LIV contracts. This was a judge that obviously is not a huge golf fan, so I thought that was a positive. So there really was no leaning on either side. And I think in the end, it showed that the LIV golfers, they made that decision. They knew a suspension was in the offing, and they have a contract now that pays them handsomely, and they cannot play on the PGA Tour for the time being. Now, obviously, there'll be appeals and more court proceedings, but this was an absolutely huge win, Joe, for the PGA Tour. And I think it was good for our first playoff event in Memphis because the players that are there were waiting for the ruling today themselves. And it was the feeling, I think about 100%. If these players had been allowed to play, the players on the PGA Tour would have turned their backs on them. This would have been a very ugly scene. And so thank goodness we don't have that. We just have a golf tournament now. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, it was fascinating today. And again, we must emphasize what a big win it was, round one for the PGA Tour.
Yeah, round one of what could be a heavyweight bout going the distance. We'll see what plays out over time, but it has to be framed in context of things that have been said, things that have been yet to be discovered. We heard earlier in the timeline Justin Thomas saying that if you're going to sue the tour, you're suing me. I make up the tour. The players make up the tour, but we also need to look at this in the framework with another piece of news that came down on Tuesday, and that's that Cam Smith reportedly has come to an agreement on a 9-figure deal, this first reported by The Telegraph, to join LIV Golf. He then comes back and says he's just focused on the FedEx Cup playoffs. Kyle Porter, if there's ink on paper for Cam Smith, what does this mean for his availability in the weeks to come?
Well, this one's interesting because, we've been talking about Live Golf as this sort of, 40-year-old tour. It's the Lee Westwoods. It's, Dustin Johnson's not 40 yet, but he's on the backside of his career. It's guys that are maybe broken down a little bit, like Brooks Koepka and Bryson DeChambeau. Not only, and we don't know if Cam Smith's going, but if he is going, he's the number 2 player in the world. He's the reigning Open champion. He's the reigning Players champion. And think about this, Joe. He could be the PGA Tour Player of the Year, depending on how the FedExCup Playoffs play out. And the report, again, in the Telegraph is that he would go and play the Live Golf event in Boston, which is September 2nd through the 4th. So right after the FedExCup Playoffs, it wouldn't affect his status for the FedExCup Playoffs. Players are not, or at least thus far, have not been banned from the PGA Tour until they hit that first shot in a Live Golf event. And so it wouldn't preclude him from playing the next 3 events. He's certainly going to get to Eastlake with a shot to win the Tour Championship and the $18 million first prize. But what could happen is that it could preclude him from playing the President's Cup at the end of September. He is a lock for the international team. He's going to be their number 1 guy. Obviously, he's the number 2 player in the world, just behind Scottie Scheffler, who's going to be on the American side. And the PGA Tour runs the President's Cup. So it does not look like players on the international side, guys like Louis Oosthuizen and Abraham Ancer that otherwise would be eligible, are going to be able to play in that event. You can throw Cam Smith in there as well. If indeed, and it does look like this is going to happen, if indeed it does turn out that he signs a contract and goes to play with Live Golf.
It's interesting, guys. Here's what last week I learned at the Wyndham Championship, or at least this was the scuttlebutt. Cameron Beckman, another Australian who was trying to make the 125, and he finished just outside. He was asked about Cam Smith and Mark Leishman, both joining Live, because Greg Norman is trying to put together these international teams, these 4-man teams from different countries that would be sponsored for big money. And Liv really believes this team competition will cement itself as something very popular in golf. And according to Cameron Beckman, and it was just a conversation with a number of reporters, he said he didn't think Cameron Smith and Mark Leishman were going to jump to Liv. That was his feeling. And he talks to his mates, as he calls them, all the time. Again, Cameron Smith showed up today in the press conference, refused to answer those questions, felt uncomfortable. So perhaps the feeling, again, from Beckman is that Cam really doesn't want to go, but his agency is negotiating a sweetheart deal for him. Of course, Mark Leishman's been on the PGA Tour for a long, long time. Both of these men respect Greg Norman a great deal, being fellow Aussies, so we'll see what transpires. But as Kyle said, Cam Smith has an opportunity now. If he goes on and plays like he has been, and he's playing the best of his career, he has an opportunity to win more than $30 million this season. So it could be a spectacular year for Cameron Smith. And then he would be the number 1 guy on the international team for the President's Cup. And I think he wants to participate in that as well, along with Mark Leishman. So there's a lot on the line for a guy like Cameron Smith and Mark Leishman. We'll see what unfolds here in weeks to come. But today, Cam Smith appeared very uncomfortable not answering those questions in the media center in Memphis.
We will continue to cover it all here on CBS Sports HQ as the news comes available in this PGA Tour Live Golf saga rolling on. But there's $75 million up for grabs over the next 3 weeks on the PGA Tour, and these 2 guys going to cover it all. Gentlemen, thank you. And don't forget, for all the latest on the ever-changing golf landscape, be sure to download and subscribe to Premier Pod and all of golf. That's the First Cut podcast. Kyle Porter, Doug Bell, Rick Game, and the whole gang breaking it down day in and day out, round by round on tour, taking you under the ropes and into the action on the First Cut podcast.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.